We are banning 1,500 models and variants of these firearms
by way of regulations.
Okay, so first things first. The ELCAN SPECTER 1-4 specifically is one of my absolute favorite optics of all time. The clever design, the effort to create it, and the versatility it tries to give you makes it one of the hands down coolest optics ever made. This is one bad motherfucker, at least on paper. To really see where it stacks up, I will be comparing it to a few other optics for perspective, including, of course, the ACOG. So the first Elcan I ever used was the M145 in 2003 on our 249 and 240 Bravos. Shortly after the ACOGs were being issued to the US, our prisoner brothers up north wanted a 4X for their 20-inch Canadian laser beams that we both used to love and share. Shortly after, we got the M145 fixed 4Xs for our machine guns with a unique machine gun reticle. These are bigger and bulkier than the ACOG, but had a rugged external turret adjustment to zero on the fly, and a rubber cover to protect it from military abuse. Over time, the Canadians came out with the updated OS 4X Elcan, which gave it a slimmer, lighter, more modern look to shave some weight, and included a top dot option for a red dot since it lacked a 1X, just like the original 4X ACOG. This did have the more forward position I like, which was a very cool replacement for the M145. Now these three optics weren't the first of their kind. Before that, I got to play with the British SUSAT 4X in 2003 when working with our British brothers in the sandbox, which you can see had its front sunshade design borrowed by the ACOG with an external adjusted one-piece mount like the Elcan. Back before that, we had optics like the Steyr Fixed 3X integrated optic that I also got to play with a bit from my Aussie friends overseas. Going back even further before that, the Fixed 4X Russian offering, which strangely enough was also ahead of its time. Now let's fast forward and bam, we get the DR 1-4 and the DR 1-6, combining all of the features Elcan became known for, and here we are. Of all four models, I'd avoid all but the 1-4. The M145 is bulky and has doo-doo reticles. The OS 4X does everything the ACOG does, for more bulk and weight, and the 1-6 lacks a true 1X, with the heaviest profile of all four. I didn't mention the Elcan 1-3-9 because I haven't used one yet, so I'll exclude it for now. Do what you want, but there's a reason the 1-4 is the most common and my favorite of the lineup. If you don't already know, the Elcan uses a rotating prism that gives you a top-in-class 1X, and with the flip of a driver's side lever here, we have a 4X, a very capable magnification for a combat rifle. This is by far what has set this design apart from anything we've ever seen in the optic realm. This is a slim lever to avoid snagging, so occasionally in wet weather it may need intentional control since you must first push downward before you can rotate the lever back and forth. You can stop the lever in between magnification, but you'll just get a black sight picture. And the optic has these deliberate stops so that you don't accidentally flip the lever into this useless sight picture, rubbing on your gear. It's either 1 or 4X, buddy. Now move along. On the exterior driver's side, we have the windage adjustments up front here. And to the rear, we have a spare tire underneath, also known as the elevation dial. Don't try to turn it before releasing the lock tab here. And after zeroing, simply remember to slide the tab back in place to avoid accidental turning of the dial losing your zero. Don't stress if you notice the Elcan can freely spring up and down at the rear even after locking the turret. It's a built-in feature. This external adjustment design is what allows the tube body to be one solid piece of metal, free of any turrets or fiber optics to get damaged, making it a top contender for military abuse. Under this beast is an integrated arms mount which left the two locking arms to the optimal passenger side, clearly to avoid snag factor on the driver's gear, and to avoid blocking the charging handle since this optic does need to sit back to the rear, like the 4X ACOG. This mount is very stout and does a great job of resetting the optic back to zero each time it's removed and reinstalled, although some people complain about these arms levers digging into the upper receiver during the process over time. I also have an arms mount on my older SOCOM ACOG, and although wide, they do retain a solid lockup and the ability to tie down the mount so your optic isn't lost by chance. At the rear driver side, we have our illumination dial. It's a very smooth dial, with very nice laser etched markings on the body, not the dial, to keep a slim profile. Up top, we have our luggage rack, aka the top dot mount location for your microdots. So far, so good, but now we have to expand on each one of these features in detail, starting with the price. If this is one of my favorite optics, why did I avoid buying one? How about $2,400 for starters? At this price, it's hard to get one hoping that you'll like it. And if you don't jive with it, you're stuck trying to find the next curious soul with a hefty tax refund to buy it on the used market, which is how I got mine. For this price, you get an awesome, high-quality Canadian cardboard box with ultra-high definition instructions, and the included kill flash. This kill flash on 1X does muddy up that high-quality view, so you don't see many people using them outside of combat. On 4X, the magnification blows right through the mesh material in the kill flash, just like the 4X ACOG does, so here you won't really notice it. You also get a rear flip cap, which is very handy. I live in a weather-punishing state where it could snow one day, rain the next day, drown in Canadian wildfire smoke the day after that, and be sunny by evening. When competing against the elements, you'd be surprised how much a rear cap matters. The front can go bare since we rarely leave our muzzle up in these conditions, and the included kill flash will help this a bit in real use. This is a pretty good deal for $2,400, considering for half the cost to get an ACOG, you only get triple padding with the optic. Underneath, a lens cleaning pen, an optic cover, a sticker, woohoo, full color instructions, and a hard protective case which latches to keep it locked up if you're not running it. I see comments all the time that the Elcan is better in every way to the ACOG, and if you think the ACOG is already too expensive, then Elcan says checkmate. If the features make up for the extra $1,200 on top, then let's first give the win to the ACOG, since I can buy two for the price of one Elcan. Yes, the Elcan is expensive. Probably the main reason we don't see them outside of taxpayer funding. For this video, I will be using the newest gen Spectre instead of the older version. The only real differences are the tethered battery cap here, so you don't lose it in the field. And we did notice that the screws holding the elevation dial into place were an Allen key on the older. And for some strange reason, Phillips had screws on the newer version. Other than that, we didn't really notice anything different. Now to the mounting differences. The Elcan does not have any aftermarket mount options to complement a canted dot like the Unity on the ACOG, or other options to clear some larger irons unless you mount the Elcan onto a higher riser like the cheap but faithful Yankee Hill riser. This externally adjusting mount that likes to move could also cause concern for debris to get caught not only in the gap, throwing off a zero, but could just get random debris caught into moving parts like the magnification lever, or even the rear elevation dial, rendering the Elcan temporarily inferior since the ACOG is a totally enclosed unit, free of any outside objects affecting its functions. Next, let's talk about that weight. This chunky boy comes in at a whopping 24 ounces as you see it, almost double the weight of the ACOG. When in use, you do feel it in comparison if you spend more than an hour at a flat range. By the time you add an IR device, a light, and a suppressor, you'll be eyeballing the ACOG owners who knew better. Another win for the ACOG. Not only is this thing heavy, but it's a larger optic. Not only in length and rail space it takes up, but in width as well. A lot of times you see this optic side by side from a two-dimensional perspective, but next to the ACOG and a 1:6 you can see the bulk. When looking behind the Elcan compared to the ACOG, the larger rear objective blocks more of your peripheral since it uses a tube shape rather than a cone shape, which jives much better with our eyes. When you add the rear flip cap, which I do think is essential for a combat optic, you lose even more of this peripheral and you'll feel sucked into the sight picture with less surrounding awareness. Another L for the Elcan. This bigger, heavier body should give you some advantages, like a larger field of view, right? Right? Well, the Elcan has a field of view of 146 feet at 100 yards. Very impressive for a scope housing. Well, on 1X, that is. Now, if we compare it to the ACOG on 4X, it has a field of view of 34.2 feet at 100 yards, compared to the ACOG of 36.8 feet at 100 yards. The Elcan does get an honorable mention for getting this close with an optic that can switch to a usable 1X, which the ACOG cannot do. Still, a silver medal finish. At least the glass is better on the Elcan. Well, no, it's actually not. It's decently close though. I mean real close. But the longer tube I think restricts the light transmission, on top of a rotating prism which tends to give the edge to the Michigan Menace. You honestly won't really notice in person, nor in the heat of the moment, because both of the optics are at the top notch of the food chain when it comes to glass quality. Most people who get to look through both side by side honestly can't tell the difference in glass quality because they're neck and neck during the day. Bravo to Elcan for not cutting any corners here. Where you do notice some glass differences is the light transmission. On 1X during day use, the light transmission is great, but on 4X the ACOG does seem brighter, especially at dusk and dawn. Here the extra light coming in helps the ACOG give you a better, brighter image. Where light transmission is really noticeable is under night vision. I still don't recommend using either of these under night vision passively, but when you do, I found that the ACOG works to a darker level than the Elcan will. On 1X, I first tried to use the Elcan passively since I heard you could. The longer tube and light transmission made this harder on top of the ability to get behind this thing being this low. Speaking of illumination settings, we need to get back to the dial. If we rotate this way, we have our single dot brightness settings, and to the right we have our full reticle illumination settings. Under night vision, I tried both the full reticle setting on all levels, which were too bright to use, and then the single dot was too bright as well. Not even sure why they have night vision levels, when all of them blow out unless you're in a lighter environment. I then mounted the Elcan onto a Yankee Hill riser to get it up a bit higher, only to find out I could not see squat on 1X or 4X even higher up.
Cannot use passively out in the wild. 1 dot, 2 dot, 3 dot, 4 dot, 5 dot, too bright. 1 dot outdoor is still too bright. Garbage. Lies.
You see videos online about this working under nods, but I'm pretty sure it only works in light environments or people's bedrooms, because out in the boons this was a bust, even on 1X, with the correct illumination settings. With the ACOG, not only is the light transmission better during dusk and dawn, it's also better for passive use, especially since the reticle illumination gets low enough on setting 1 to actually be used without being too bright, blowing out your view in contrast to the target and its surroundings. Yet another win for the ACOG. All I'm saying is night and passive options will be better served using a top dot, which is exactly why this feature was added to both optics. Even though the Elcan has a 1X, it still needs a top dot to effectively shoot passive just like the ACOG does. You don't have any light transmission issues or a thick body creating any blur with a top dot, especially using something like the SRO up top. Since you'll need a top dot most likely, the ACOG also has a better presentation when using the top dot position that sits a bit more forward than the Elcan, especially since the ACOG has a lower rear profile that puts the top dot in a better center alignment location than the bulky Elcan body does. The Elcan also has this rear iron sight that likes to hit your NVGs on presentation, especially since the top dot sits lower and closer to the housing. A larger micro dot does help with this a bit, like the SRO, but man is the TAO2 SRO combo a passive dream. During the day is a different story. I still don't really see a use for the full reticle illumination unless you need that perfect brightness at dusk or dawn for the BDC. But let's give a huge shout out to the 1X dot inside this thing, which gets insane bright. I mean, this is truly a red dot somehow on top of an etched reticle. If we compare the brightness levels to the LED ACOG side by side, we can really get the idea about how bright this thing actually is. Powered by a CR2032, we should get about 2,000 hours on the second to highest setting and around 400 on the max dot brightness compared to the 12,000 hours on setting 4 with the ACOG, the recommended setting that I use. The ACOG on full brightness will get you somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 hours, I'm guessing, which all said and done means the ACOG gets about 5 times the battery life over the Elcan. Another massive blow to the Canadian hero. So having this 1X function is so good, right? Well, first off, it's not always a true 1X. Depending on how far away your eye is from the perfect sweet spot, the magnification may shrink or expand ever so slightly. This 1X is still not as good as a red dot, which is as true as a 1X point of aim will get. And what good is the 1X really when it can get blocked off by laser devices or anything bulky on top of the rail? One of the few flaws in having this 1X all in the same package as your magnification, with no way to get it higher unless you put the Elcan higher up on a riser. Ironically, just using a red dot on top of the ACOG will actually give you not only that true 1X like a red dot, but you don't have to lose any peripheral vision from the thick housing like using the 1X on the Elcan. This open peripheral is nice when shooting both eyes open, when transitioning between targets, since you can see way more of the surroundings and don't get sucked into the tube-like view, which can have you pass over a target much easier. Well, unless you add a top dot, which has a field of view of everywhere you look. You can also come back as far as you want, and there is no collapsing eye box like the Elcan, which comes in handy when shooting from strange positions, which don't give you the perfect head angle for a good sight picture. Having a red dot for a true 1x is still much better, so I didn't enjoy the Elcan 1x as much as I thought I did. On top of that, which is faster to switch between 4x and 1x. The Elcan is pretty quick, although you do lose your sight picture when losing one arm to swap the lever. Where the ACOG RMR, you can simply move your head up or down without sacrificing your sight picture or support arm. Also the faster of the two. This is only an example for those who might think a quick switch between a dot and magnification is what makes the Elcan superior. Yes, the Elcan is fast, usually faster than using an LPVO, but the ACOG stack is just faster and more stable. The Elcan never stood a chance here. To get this amazing 1x and a decent 4x, you're going to want to place the Elcan back pretty far, just like the ACOG, possibly removing the rear iron sight to get it perfect in an upright position. The way we'd really put some work in with this 1x. Now with the ACOG this close, you can get hit in the face under recoil in weird spots, but not the Elcan. I'm just kidding. When I was doing some barricade shooting, I had my rifle in a funny position, and if you watch close, it also gave me a little bite to the face right here. I kept shooting and had another nice little cut, so I'd say the eye relief between the two is actually a tie. Finally, some cope for the Elcan gang.
Elcan got me.
Actually, you know what? On paper, the Elcan technically has a longer eye relief, so I'll just give it the win. To have some mercy on the Elcan, let's talk about eye relief, because the American offering is so bad, right? Well, if we put both optics in a head-to-head, we can start with both of them at their optimal range to eliminate eye shadow. With both on 4x, we can start from the optimal eye relief distance to get our full field of view, free of any eye shadow. As we come back from the optic, they both have a collapsing eye box pretty quick. About the same in my opinion. Up and down, left and right, you can see the similar eye shadow. Back at the recommended eye relief, you can see the Elcan has a more sensitive eye box here as well. One of the surprise bonuses of the short eye relief cone-shaped ACOG. The more bizarre thing is that as you get closer in, the ACOG does not have any eye shadow, but the Elcan starts to collapse in more like a low power variable does. This means the Elcan has a sweet spot somewhere around here, and outside of that, you might get a rough sight picture if not perfectly aligned. The ACOG definitely has the better eye box at the loss of an extra inch of eye relief. I feel kind of bad beating this optic down, so let's move on to reticles. If you're looking for reticle options, then don't get your hopes up. This optic comes with one reticle for 5.56, which to its defense is a modified crosshair reticle. If you know me, I'm totally cool with this. I think having a center dot for your 100-meter zero is perfect, since it can honestly do most of the 1x work, and by the time you need magnification, you have the BDC. Sometimes with the ACOG crosshair reticles, the 100 and 200 lines can be congested under illumination, which this center dot solves with only the center dot being illuminated here. The 200 isn't congested since it's just the tip of the vertical post, unlike the ACOG crosshair. This dot on full illumination is too bright and covers this fine 200-meter point of aim, just like the TO2 ACOG does, blocking over your target. Or just run the reticle black. Yes, the ACOG has more reticles to choose from, but I wouldn't mind this exact reticle in an ACOG to replace my beloved crosshair. Except that this thing is way too fat for my liking. What a major bummer that we have probably one of the most practical reticles with a center dot, and they go and blow it with these super thick lines to cover our targets. If we compare both reticles side by side, you can see how fine the ACOG reticles are in person, which is my preference. I see thick reticles like this all the time in lower quality optics like the Strike Eagles, and I can't wrap my head around why they pooped the bed on this part of the reticle. The only thing I could think of as to why a thicker reticle could be beneficial is to be seen faster in congested vegetation, kinda like Canada. Thinner reticles are a bit harder to see, especially if you don't have the best eyesight in this terrain. I'm not sure how often you'd be using 4x in this dense brush, so my vote is still in favor of a thin reticle. Although thick, don't worry, you can still get hits out to 500 no problem. As long as the targets aren't small or behind cover. If the Elcan and the ACOG reticle had a baby with a center dot and the thinner BDC below, I'd be in heaven. This thick reticle is really the biggest bummer to me, and I'd love to see the future reticles from Elcan clean this up a bit, because now I gotta give the reticle edge to the ACOG. This is because the reticle is mainly for your 4x use out to distance, which is why I think it should be a thinner reticle. I'm not talking about the dot because that's a top feature, but the reticles in general, with refinement and options to have to go to the ACOG. I think after comparing the two item by item, we can finally humble the Elcan gang a bit. Sorry fellas, but ACOG gang won't go down that easy. Now that we have categorically made it known that the Elcan is not better than the ACOG in every way, in what ways is it better and why do we want one? Besides being able to show off the cool flip lever and wowing people who have never heard of one before, the Elcan is still a pretty cool optic. But let's give a huge shout out to the 1X dot inside this thing. This feature is the second most important attribute that makes this optic special. On 1X, this thing totally feels like you have a red dot, which is on the same height as your 4X, so you don't have to use a chin weld. You get the same 100-yard zero to avoid managing two trajectories, whether you're on 1X or 4X. Since it's a second focal, all you'll need to worry about on 1X is the center dot and take your shot. And you know that the BDC will be dead on using the 4X to range estimate and take your shot. This ability to flip from a true 1X to a 4X magnification, all on the same height above bore, is what made this optic famous. Probably the number one reason everybody wants one. This massive field of view on 1X outside of CQB is nice to scan your terrain so that you don't miss anything. Now there isn't really a need to have so many levels of magnification in between, like using a low power variable, when you do most of your work on 1X, and then slap it to 4X to refine your point of aim and take your shot with the BDC drops that are included. You can identify out the distance if need be, and then quickly put it back to 1X so you don't get caught with your pants down. The 4X isn't as restrictive as you might think outside of 100 yards, but anyone who tries to do some up-close work knows that a true 1X is much faster to get your point of aim on target and transition between targets. Before this optic came out, this function was only something we dreamed about having, something the LPVO market still hasn't achieved. This massive field of view on 1X outside of CQB is nice to scan your terrain so that you don't miss anything, and quickly zoom in if you find a threat or just want detailed information. Sometimes your area can provide plenty of hiding spots, so a quick sneak peek is much faster. Other optics will require you to add a top dot or an expensive mount to give you a lot of the ability this optic has right out of the gate. To be honest, I personally ran this optic mostly on 4X and only switched to the 1X when inside 25 to 50 yards or so. You'd be surprised that 4X doesn't over-magnify since it has this massive field of view. Upon presentation, you will most likely line it up directly over the target pretty quick, even on 4X. There seem to be two camps that are drawn to this optic. Up-close guys will want it for the red dot 1X work and have the available 4X for shots out to distance when need be. The other camp prioritizes the 4X as a do-all magnification, which is where I usually am, and then have the 1X as a backup when approaching super close distances where the 4X can hold you back. Outside of 75 yards, I definitely get hits faster running the 4X, and like I said, I had no problem finding the targets with this massive field of view. Something that has been much more fun than running the red dot magnifier combo that lacks ranging and BDC options. Running this optic the last 7 months or so has been pretty awesome to get the Elcan in my system and potentially out of my system. I've had scenarios where I forgot what magnification I had it on last, and then I'll draw on target either underpowered or overpowered and have to use the lever to select. This does happen the same as running an LPVO, so unless you run a top dot as your dedicated 1X, maybe be aware of what magnification you left it on last before you have to slap a shot on the fly. This front kill flash extension also provides a good sunshade when directed towards the sun, which a lot of optics will suffer from. The weight of this also isn't that bad in comparison to other LPVO offerings that get up to the 28 or 34 ounce range, also positioned much further forward. It does feel lighter than running an LPVO to me since this optic is balanced towards the rear of the rifle, which is a bonus to me. I'd argue that this is a faster and lighter option over the LPVO, and Brassfax did a good video about where this optic fits in the grand scheme of things, so that's worth a watch. LPVOs also require more parts, like the mount and a top dot or canted dot, which is more things to worry about. Optics coming loose or extra red dots losing zero, it could potentially be a pain in the butt. Instead of having to buy an extra red dot, this has one straight out of the gate included in the price, and the good news is, if the battery dies, you still have an etched reticle. This optic is a one-stop shop. This optic is a good do-it-all setup for the 0 to 400 yard range in my opinion and makes a great addition to any team. I think Spectre Gang and ACOG Gang could be friends and be part of the larger picture called Prism Gang. I liked running both of these optics, and for reasons earlier, I just prefer the ACOG a bit more overall. At the end of the day, it comes down to personal preference. If you noticed, we never mentioned the last category, which is durability, something we only get anecdotal stories about. We know the ACOG has proven itself before time and time again. The part I wanted to see, is this thing durable or not? But what about the real Elcan? To find out, I first had to re-zero my Elcan for the final test using some M193. I made sure that the center dot was zeroed at 100 yards on target and then headed to the proving grounds. Here I wanted to split the difference at 50 yards since I'll be using steel-cased crap. First, the two reference shots, which clearly don't hit the same as the 5.56 I just used. Now I'm actually going to remove the optic and place it on a blank upper to better simulate real use to beat it up a bit. This is more realistic to the way we would actually bang this thing up, so let's see how it does with some minor impacts. I'm not going crazy with this optic because torture tests are getting played out, but I knew this optic is too expensive for Elcan owners to put a scratch on theirs, so I figured I'd do the deed, because I wanted to know myself if all these moving parts can be trusted. Now back on the rifle to check.
Interesting.
About 4 inches left and 2 inches low.
I went left and down.
I'm actually quite surprised since this mount should return to 0. It also could be the rotating prism inside, but I have no way to know. I want to test if the mount can correct the 0 we lost and take 2 more shots after adjusting. Yep, we're back to where we started, so let's swap it back onto the test upper. A Daniel Defense quad rail that should hold up, and place it right under the path of my vehicle. We are a mobile society now, and vehicles are definitely a possible way to hurt your optics, so let's see. Also know that I actually took it for a ride in the bed of my truck. This is very common since the military often has equipment and vehicles getting sloshed around, but apparently these country roads weren't enough to really bang it up. So let's throw it back on the rifle and see if we have any impact shift. Just a hair to the left from where we were, so the impacts didn't change much, to be honest. The truck nor the road bumps didn't really have an effect on this thing.
Brightness, okay.
It definitely needs harder impacts, so let's give it some.
Up the ante a little bit. Ooh.
Lip bent in a little bit. So I definitely didn't expect the front of this housing to bend, but it did not hurt the kill flash. And before we test for impact shifts, to treat it fair to the ACOG test, I want to throw it from a much higher location onto this gravel lane below. This is about 60 feet, and you can see me up here on top from the GoPro. Now as I line up my throw between these trees, I totally bounce the optic off this tree, sending the Spectre over the cliff edge. I have no idea if it's on a ledge or at the bottom, but this sucks. I probably shouldn't have threw it like a bum with a bad aim. It's time to go down and see if I can find it on this shale and limestone base down below that is very slippery and dangerous. This trench is filled with downed trees, briar thorns, and about 6 inches of wet, cold leaves. I'm not sure if it's down here or up above on a ledge because my ear pro was off and I didn't hear where it went. I ended up digging for about 3 hours and gave up before this early winter nightfall. The next morning I came back because this thing was $1,800. It's not something that you give up on. It's worth every briar slice. And I gotta get this video finished, so it's time to start digging again. After about 20 angry minutes of lost hope, I decided it's time to check the cliff edge up top. Back near the spot I threw it from, I tied some 550 cord to a few trees and slid down the ledge to clear some leaves. I made a small waist harness because I know how every bad story goes when you're out here alone doing these kinds of things. I mean, right over this small ledge is a straight drop off to a broken back and no one will find me for days. Now it's time to dig, clear annoying branches, not die, and dig some more. This is very cold up here and slippery, but I gotta keep clearing. You guys are counting on me. After not finding anything, I decided to go back down and start searching some more. Trying to line myself up with where it could have went, I dig more. And more. And more. And wait. Maybe I have the wrong angle.
Found it.
This little was hard to see under the leaves with its gray color. I could only imagine the flat dark earth version right about now, but holy crap am I relieved. A little moisture from staying out in the cold all night, but no real damage from the fall. And you know what I gotta do now. About an additional 10 feet above the ledge for a 70-foot drop or so. Let's get this back on the rifle and see where she hits.
Down to locks.
So, we got it back on center enough to send it to the final test. This place should look familiar to you, just a bit colder. It's the same 36-foot drop that the ACOG managed to survive, and now it's the Elcan's turn. I'm not going to shoot this thing because it has too many internal parts that move that I don't think will make it from getting shot. But I do think this test is beyond what we could ask out of a combat optic. If it passes this, it'll get my respect and earn its place in the ranks of legendary optic status. I actually felt a bit sick this time around, but somebody's got to do it, so cross your fingers, fellas. Oh boy, that was a hard hit, so let's do a quick inspection. Right off the rip, you can see the top front of the housing has bent in a little bit more, this time bending the actual kill flash tube extension. Maybe I can shape it back, but overall the rest of the optic seems to be pretty solid. The front and this rear lens has no cracks or even any chips, but the rear iron sight up top did get its pushed in. I'll probably pop them off anyway, so whatever. The mount surprisingly has no damage, which I thought would be the weakest point. However, the throw lever is bent down a bit. A bit of a curved lever now with a little bit of play that it didn't have before, but seems to actuate just fine. Now we just got to see if the prism rotates centered like it did before. The second thing that I was worried about. Illumination works just fine on all levels, so the electronics must be pretty stout. And it looks like the rotating prism is working just fine on both levels. Holy crap, this thing has surpassed my expectations of durability, but hold your horses because we still gotta see if this thing holds zero or can be re-zeroed before we start looking online to buy one. Back to the range for the final shots. Mounted straight back to the same rifle, using the same target from this whole video, with a new fresh paint job of course, to see how far off this thing will be. Lock and load, switch to 4x for accuracy, and take a slow shot using the center dot, dead center on this duplex target, and enjoy.
Wow. It's almost dead center. Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's almost dead center. Let me do another one. Wow.
Two shots under an inch apart. Call me impressed. Let's just see real quick if the mount can adjust, and then we can wrap it up.
Money off dead center.
Close enough to prove a point, I'd say, and wow. Elcan gang, you have my respect, and I won't beat up on this optic anymore. Funny enough, I'll be keeping this thing in my inventory and run it exactly how it is, because after all, we have another contender to this Elcan coming up in my next video. The AVCI from 3E that you may have seen before, and you're gonna like this video as well. Until then, I want to say thanks to every one of you for watching and hope my hard work and effort into each video earns your subscription and some likes and shares if you do me a solid. This is all self-made and funded from my own hard work and passion to deliver good information to you. Again, thanks, and see you on the next video.